Don't go to university in 2026. Just don't. That advice comes from an unlikely source, Jenna Price, an education writer and columnist in the Sydney Morning Herald who herself has a doctorate. Price writes, I spent my entire young parenthood urging my children to study hard and to go to university. Now, she says, parents need to stop pushing. Do not force the next generation onto a treadmill with no safety barriers, no assurance, and no confidence in the future. I have to say this article made me really sad. It used to be that education was a silver bullet. That's certainly the message that I was getting when I grew up. It was a way that we ensured a level playing field for everyone and an opportunity. If you worked hard, you could move yourself up the social ladder. But now successive governments are defunding the sector. AI is leading us to question the whole purpose of what an education is, let alone a higher education. And I can kind of see Jenna Price's point. It does seem like a gamble when before it seemed like the surest thing, the ultimate goal. Jessie, I know this made you feel sad too because that's how you commented on it in the Slack. But isn't it realistic at this point?
It made me really sad. And there's I suppose a point that Jenna Price made in this that I feel is being missed, and it's the words next year. So she says, don't go to university next year. And the reason that she says that is because there are some really specific policy issues at play. I have a lot of friends who moved into academia, and they will talk about the job losses, the gutting of entire departments of history, of sociology, of politics has just been so devastating, especially at a time I would argue we need it more than ever.
And why has that been?
So there's a few reasons. One big one is that in 2020, under the Morrison government, they had like a job-ready graduates package, and it meant that humanities became far more expensive to study, 117% increase.
Because it was less vocational, is that it?
It was less vocational, but basically—
I was reading that an arts degree costs $50,000.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's become way, way, way more expensive. And so what that means is that they went, look, engineering, STEM, all of that, that's what we want. Now—
So those degrees are cheaper?
Well, basically there are just more incentives to do them. Right? And what that means is that there's defunding of certain subjects, whether that be— because I suppose on paper it's like, oh, a historian. What do you need a
philosopher?
A philosopher. What do you need one of them for? Well, the reason that you need one for is because of something called like peer-reviewed research, which is like an understanding of all human knowledge that has come before us. Like when I went to university— Mayor, I'll explain this to you because you wouldn't know.
How does it work?
Try and use small words.
Thank you, Amelia. You get like readers. Do you know what a reader is? No. Okay. So it's like when you read, you like there are like words on a page and it like you can almost hear them in your head. Anyway.
What's a reader?
That was not a good definition.
I'm trying to explain reading to Mia. A reader is when you get like a whole lot of the most influential work in a particular— like whether it's philosophy or history, like let's say World War II, right? And it's got the most important chapters ever written on it.
Oh, wow.
You as someone who are not in university, you actually don't have access to that. Like I now not being at university, I don't have access to any of that knowledge, right?
But does AI?
There's a question mark around
I bet
that.
it does.
It's— yeah. But basically the point is that you have access to a certain level of knowledge and rigor and skills that have never been more important, like critical thinking, like judgment, all of that. And there was this great article in The Conversation which had as the headline, AI is driving down the price of knowledge and the knowledge premium is deflating. So basically knowledge has become this commodity.
But isn't that good because it means that knowledge is more accessible? Because you said before tertiary education was the great equaliser. It wasn't because a lot of people couldn't afford to go to university. So back in 1989, 20% of high school students went on to university. Now it sort of increased by about 10% each decade until the last couple of years where it started to go backwards for the first time. It's now at 41%, which is the lowest it's been since 2014. And partly they say that's because there's more employment, so there are more job opportunities for people and they don't have to necessarily be tertiarily educated.
Yeah.
But if you are, you're likely to earn between 25 to 90% more as someone with tertiary education in your career. So there's still a lot of reasons. And of course, there are some jobs you can't do, like doctor, lawyer, architect, without some kind of qualification.
So there's a few things that have happened. The first is COVID, I think, was a massive disruptor to this entire industry because the international students and all of that, and that was like a big source of income for universities like that had.
And it just got cut off overnight.
Plug pulled out. But interestingly, as you say, in the UK and the US, they've done a big study of kind of first year of jobs to get you into the workforce, and requirements for degrees. As AI skyrockets, requirements for your first job, you no longer need a degree because it's like that knowledge they assume is already there. But what I would argue is that the knowledge isn't already there. We think it is, but it's not to the same standard. Like what you learn in a university degree, what you learn about synthesizing knowledge is not available on ChatGPT. It simply isn't.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts about this. And I think I want to pick up on the idea that, 30 years ago, university was for people who could afford it. I think what we've seen in the last 30, 40 years is this idea of education as something that adds value to an employee and to an employer.
And to a life.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to.
Democracy,
I think when I was at university, the big thing that we were meant to be learning was how to code. Well, now we don't need to code because the machines know how to code. So I'm very wary of anyone telling you, like, this is the skill you need to learn to be marketable today. It turns out that maybe the skills you need to learn to be marketable are much less tangible or concrete than that. And they're things like learning how to read something and ask questions and think critically about it afterwards. And that stuff is also fun as well. And I think we've gotten this narrative coming out of Silicon Valley that university is for elites and it's silly. Like Peter Thiel, for instance, the venture capitalist, has been giving out scholarships to young people to not go to university, to go and work for him in Silicon Valley. And he's pushing this idea that university is again for out-of-touch elites. And I just want to push back on that and say that it would be so much nicer if university was seen as a place where you could learn knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's not about turning yourself into a more productive worker. It's about reading some really great books and like talking about what great thinkers have thought through history.
Yeah, it's not for everyone though, because for me I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but just uni didn't suit me. Like all the things that you talked about, loving about university and big ideas and sitting around and thinking, I found it sort of too slow and too big. Not that I was better than it, but it just didn't suit. I wanted to sort of get stuck in and get my hands dirty rather than thinking. Yeah, it just didn't suit me.
Which I think is a fair point. And I think that with limited resources, the experience of being at university has changed and is probably far worse than it was when I was at university even 15 years ago, right?
Did you have a good cultural time at university? Because I grew up, of course, watching all the American movies and college life, and you did have that. You went to Harvard. You had college life, Amelia.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you how much that coloured your experience of university, and then Jessie, if you did that in Australia.
Yeah, part of what I loved about the fact that everyone at my university lived on campus was that you just had meals every day with different people. You'd meet someone in a class and then go and have lunch together afterwards, or you would just every single day, 3 meals a day, you're eating with different people, you're talking about different things. And there was a sense that you were learning how to talk about ideas and disagree with people in a respectful way.
Oh, that's interesting.
My very first day there, we did something where I was divided into a little learning group and we went around to introduce ourselves. And there was a guy in the group who said, "My name's Mark and I'm a Republican from New York." And that was how he introduced himself. And he was really proud of the fact that he was a conservative on a campus where, to be fair, there were not a lot of conservatives. And by the end of our 4 years there, he was planning the same-sex marriage of his best friend to his partner, something he never thought that he would have done back in a much more conservative era when same-sex marriage was still very much being hotly debated. So he had an ideological evolution by meeting new people and by being exposed to new ideas. And I think about that a lot because I think that's really the main value of what I got out of that experience.
Yeah, I didn't live on campus. I think that really changes your experience of it. But they're some of the most, like, the experiences that shape me the most. Like, I learned from actual historians, and I majored in Holocaust studies and was taught by a man who lost both his parents in the Holocaust and fled Europe. And he was worked at the Sydney Jewish Museum. Like, stuff like that, and learning.
I can't give you that experience.
No. And learning research principles that have come so in hand, like come in handy in what I do every day. And that's why this conversation feels so existential to me, because yes, it's about university policy and what universities look like in Australia next year. But actually, I think it does belong to a broader story about this anti-intellectualism, I feel, that almost was pushing through during COVID maybe. And
it's part of why I would argue in the US, the Trump administration is doing all it can to basically bring universities to their knees, because they know that these are potentially dangerous and subversive places. When we talk about love of learning, that's so abstract, but I'm glad that you mentioned a specific thing that you learned and studied, Jessie, and how it stuck with you, because my most amazing experience was I hated maths in high school. I stopped doing it at the end of year 10. I was so bad at it. I would sit in exams and add up my score and be like, oh, I'm going to barely scrape past 50 in this, and I just couldn't wait to get rid of it. But because I did a liberal arts degree, which I know have increased in popularity in Australia in recent years too, where you have to do a bit of maths, you have to do a bit of science in addition to your humanities major, I had to do a maths class. It was called The Magic of Numbers, and it was my favorite class. Spoiler alert.
Was it?
I came to see that maths was like magical and beautiful, and that prime numbers are like the greatest mystery of all time. And you see how my eyes light up about it, and I just hated maths before. So I want other people to have that experience.
You know, and it's funny, this kind of Silicon Valley pushback on sort of the intellectual elite, and they joke about, oh, you're going to study African lesbian poetry. Like, you hear kind of conservatives say that. The story of, I think it's Steve Jobs being at university. There are all these stories about the ones that dropped out and they didn't really need it.
Mark Zuckerberg is a famous one.
Yes, and they all dropped out, right? But the story of like how Apple got its font is that he stumbled into a lecture on like hieroglyphics or something and learnt something about font. And that to me has been like my study of Greek and Roman myth, which sounds so ridiculous, has informed both the books I've written. And like the serendipity of being just surrounded by knowledge. Knowledge builds on knowledge. And when you pull the kind of plug out of intellectualism in a democracy, I think you get to a really, really scary place.